Welcome back to Let's Talk. I'm Jade Harrell, joined by Jamie Ballantyne Dolby, Amy Rivera, Amber Clear, and Miss Tina Love. Welcome back to the program. Today, we are also welcoming Shima Rostami, Executive Director of Gateway Human Trafficking, because we are having a very difficult but necessary conversation about human trafficking. She started the first human trafficking conference in the Midwest in 2018. Her background and education is in criminal justice and is here to provide a greater understanding and insight about human trafficking. I think we've all got a preconceived idea of it, but it doesn't always present that way. So let's start with, what is human trafficking? Shima, will you enlighten us?
First, thank you for having me to share with you and your audience about human trafficking. It's a very important topic and issues in our community. So human trafficking is often misunderstood, unfortunately, by our community. And the perspective our community have about human trafficking is mainly from the perspective they got from famous movies and TV shows, that it's not 100% or most of the time present the problem and the victims and survivors of human trafficking. For a human trafficking situation to happen, we need three elements. So we need the acts, we need the means, and we need the purpose. So what are the acts of human trafficking? Acts in human trafficking situation are those acts committed by traffickers. The law, which is the only federal law we have in the United States, is Victim Protection Act of 2000. So the law is specific about those acts that traffickers take action on so that we can prove a human trafficking. Some of those acts are recruitment, harboring, and transportation of victims. The key is that at least one of these acts are needed in order for prosecutors and law enforcement to pursue a human trafficking case. Second, I want to move to the means. What are the means of any human trafficking situation to happen? They are force, fraud, or coercion. Coercion is psychological manipulation, meaning, again, second step for prosecutors and law enforcement to prove a human trafficking case is that they need to prove at least one of the force, fraud, or coercion happened in a case. And lastly, we need a purpose. What is the purpose of human trafficking? It needs to be labor or commercial sexual exploitation of an individual and person. Then we go more in deep of human trafficking of adults and children that I would be happy to answer to your questions in follow-up conversations.
Well, I'm sure we have plenty to run your way. Do all of those specifications, the means, the act, and the purpose, does that make it difficult to prosecute, to catch, to hold accountable those that commit the acts?
You mentioned a great point. Of course it does, especially when it comes to the point that prosecutors and law enforcement need to prove the existence of means which are force, fraud, or coercion. Unfortunately, most of the cases we see are cases that traffickers are engaging psychological manipulation or coercion to convince victims to do those commercial sex activities or labor that they want the victims to do. And this is a big problem because coercion is psychological manipulation. This is something happening inside the victim's mind in a form that even victims don't believe they are victims. They don't see anything wrong is in that situation. Many of those situations are in those trafficking cases that we have traffickers getting victims into the trafficking operation via a loving relationship. So imagine the process of grooming is that trafficker who knows that this individual person is vulnerable right now in their lives, target them because they are vulnerable, they lost their job, for example. So traffickers target them establishing a loving relationship, and then later is that, hey, this is what I do for work, for my job, for my life. If you join me, then I promise you in 4 years, 5 years, we are going to have a great family. So let's just start doing that together. So that psychological manipulation and the trust traffickers establish in that relationship really makes troubles many times for prosecutors and law enforcement to prove that coercion happened, because in addition to establishing that relationship, they need to prove that at the court of justice. Not only that, process itself is tremendously difficult, and in many cases, victims drop that rights. Also, when we are facing cases that survivors have been victims through psychological manipulation, it really takes an ocean of armies to come into the scene, help that victim and survivor to see that it was a coercion and it wasn't a real love relationship.
So many nuances and spaces where trafficking could exist, and the dilemma of this for victims. Give us a sense of the magnitude of this. I would imagine that with such a limited response that the problem continues to increase. How great is the problem? Give us a sense of the scope.
The problem is that great that I can't describe it to you.
Mhm.
So human trafficking is identified and recognized by international organizations and also the United States Department of Justice in various reports as the second or third most flourishing criminal activity in the world and in the United States, often after illegal gun trade and drug. So now you imagine how big the problem is that we are not aware of that. So the problem is that traffickers, unfortunately, see people as object, the same way they are trafficking drug, the same way they are trafficking illegal gun. However, in reality, they are humans. So then I go back to the process of bringing traffickers to the justice. We can't manipulate gun. We can't manipulate drug because they are a thing. When you have them, you have those things available. However, traffickers are able to manipulate people. For example, imagine that there is a trafficker driving in Highway 70 with a victim of human trafficking. So a law enforcement officer stopped them because of a traffic violation. Start asking the questions. So when the officer asks questions about the victims, what's your relationship with this person? They say, well, he is my boyfriend.
Mhm.
Is this person or that person related to me? And so it makes it difficult to just pursue even suspected human trafficking and suspicious human trafficking cases in the real world. So the problem is so huge, the problem is so big, there are so many misunderstandings and cultural issues in our community that actually add on to the mix, which as we move forward, I really would like to talk about working children and the situation child labor are experiencing, that especially post-COVID pandemic, I have deep concern about this population being more and more in a situation to be trafficked in our community.
Yeah. Ladies, I see you nodding, and the same look of angst
Yeah.
in your faces too. So let's talk. Tina.
Yeah. Well, Shima, thank you so much for all of the information. I want to make sure that we mention, along with all of your information, just kind of level set and bring it home for people who are watching right now, to understand that some of these predators are in malls picking up children. Some of them, many of them are online, from what I'm hearing also. So when a child is possibly playing games or on a social media site, these predators will oftentimes send invites to be friends with a young person. And you know how children are, they want friends, right? That's in this day and age, we want friends and followers on our social media.
Everybody wants friends. Everybody.
Right, right. And so they do it unknowingly, not understanding that this person is actually, like you said, Shima, grooming them.
Mhm.
They're watching their every move online. And so that person is waiting until the child is upset with their parent or upset with their friend or having a bad day and makes a comment. And that's when oftentimes that predator will go in for the kill and lure that child sometimes off. You know, let me pick you up. Let me take you somewhere. I'll go and buy you something or do whatever, like you were saying, those gifts. And then the child is lured away. And many times, you know, that's how they fall into it. I found that really, really interesting. And I want to make sure that parents are listening and understand this can happen to any child. It doesn't necessarily have to be a child who's in a high socioeconomic status or low. This can happen to any child. And so that's something that I just want to make sure that if parents are listening, that they understand the threat that's out there.
Thank you so much, Tina. That was a great point. If I may add on to that, that's exactly the point. So traffickers cannot broadcast drug, cannot broadcast illegal gun, but they can broadcast live streaming of children. And that is a form of human trafficking that we have seen increase during the COVID pandemic.
Yes.
Beginning of the pandemic, we even seen that traffickers were advertising that they have PPE to provide for those who are coming to receive services from them if they wanted physical in-person services. And if not, live streaming of commercial sex activities was provided to people. And that's exactly what has increased during the COVID pandemic. Traffickers have found their way more and more engage the technology and online activities. And also, you mentioned a great point about how they are grooming kids via social media and tracking them. A colleague of mine in one of the universities in Ohio, 2018, did a research. They studied what are those specific statements when kids post online that is a sign for traffickers reach out to them. One of those, some of those statements was that, for example, a kid was posting, "No one loves me. I'm fat. I'm not beautiful." And then it was something that in return that trafficker who were watching them, when they see those statements, they reach out that, "Don't worry, I'm here. I love you. I think you're the most beautiful person on the earth." And then grooming that way. And even they are not going to disclose that they are a 30-something, 40-something man. So they are going to present themselves as a person in their own high school or neighboring high school or in their neighborhood. Just expand that grooming process. Thank you for mentioning that point. You are right on the target.
We're going to take a quick break because this conversation is so rich and necessary. And I know Amy and Amber and Jamie have contribution and questions as well. This touches us all if we're thinking about those stats. So let's just take a quick break and we'll come back to some more in-depth understanding. And there's just so much more we're going to discuss when we come back. And we'll talk about what to watch for as well in our communities and how we can report it as well as help. So stick around, we'll be right back.
Hey, let's check out this park. Oh, wow, that's really cool.
To find a great local park or forest near you, go to discovertheforest.org.
I'm Jenny Garth, and as a mother of 3, I know kids worry about a lot of things. Getting enough food to eat shouldn't be one of them. But here in America, that is a real worry for 1 in 5 children. This is unacceptable. and something Feeding America is working to solve. Through a nationwide network of food banks, Feeding America serves virtually every community in the United States, including yours. See how you can help your community. Visit feedingamerica.org. Together, we can solve hunger. Together, we're Feeding America.
Welcome back to the show. We've been discussing human trafficking with Shima Rostami, Executive Director of Gateway Human Trafficking. Ladies, let's talk. Amy.
So when I'm hearing these stories that we hear all the time, and I'm hearing how children can be brainwashed or manipulated into doing things. And one of the things that I keep thinking about is the biggest topic that we're hearing is the Jeffrey Epstein situation. And to me, that's trafficking at its finest, with individuals that you would never think of doing that. And so as a parent, what advice would you give to parents about their children if a situation like that came to them? You know, because most people are like, oh, they would never do that. They have, you know, they're millionaires, or they do this and they do that. And trafficking comes in all shapes and sizes. You know, monsters come differently. And how do we prepare our children to even have that conversation, or to come tell us, Mom, Dad, this person said this to me, what does that mean, kind of thing?
Thank you, Amy. It's a great question. My best advice is that try to be a friend. Try to be the best friend of your children. When you establish that friendship with them from the early ages, you don't need them to come to you, because they just come to you automatically. They are not going to look for someone to fill that gap without you knowing about that situation. So that's the best strategy. Try to be with them, because that's the clue. That's the clue. Traffickers are looking for those families, children from those families, that they are vulnerable in those situations. They want to target those children that they don't feel comfortable to move forward and discuss and disclose with their parents about what's going on. Because, I mean, any healthy family that we see, it's just a question. What's the deal with this 40-plus-year-old guy doing with my 15-year-old daughter?
Mm-hmm.
So, however, when that close relationship doesn't exist between that child and the parents, that's when the situation happens. And as a matter of fact, traffickers are looking to target those families or children from those families, that gap already exists.
Have the police or other resources, do they have the training also? Do you believe they have the training to deal with this? Because I hear a lot of times when I hear stories of how someone got into human trafficking as a victim, a lot of times there is a great amount of victim blaming as well, because maybe of the victim's past behaviors, or where they were a runaway. And it's very unfortunate, but I believe that causes, you know, maybe the help to either be delayed or the help not to be there. How do you feel that the courts and the police are trained in dealing with this now that it's becoming more aware? We are all becoming more aware of it.
Thank you so much. It's a great question. So education, as a matter of fact, is the key. As you may know, Gateway Human Trafficking has only one mission, and the mission is educating communities about human trafficking and inspiring positive systemic change to end human trafficking. And that's exactly a start with education of 5 top groups of community that we are focusing on right now. So it was general public, law enforcement officer, social service providers, and also welfare people working in the welfare systems. And then through the social media apps, that it was the 5 top communities that they were able to identify victims of human trafficking. So in an ongoing base, training, law enforcement and criminal justice system is a key in order to help identify more victims, especially trauma-informed approaches is very important, because we see that many times a victim might see as a criminal in human trafficking cases beginning, especially if it has been through commercial sexual exploitation. However, if we have those trained staff in the body of law enforcement, if that institution or district has the human trafficking task force, they are able to identify the signs and then hopefully see that individual as a victim, not as a criminal, and provide them the protection and support. Because ladies, the key is that if the society, if any community doesn't know about any problem, they are not able to ask for solutions, and they are not able to solve that problem. And concerning human trafficking, unfortunately, right now, we still don't know many things. So we are not able to ask about impactful solutions right now.
I think one of the questions I have, we keep talking about the people bringing these victims in, actually trafficking the people as male. We just gender them as male, I think, because it's this big bad person. But I think I've read some statistics, and maybe you can clarify, that it's actually females and other victims that are more successful at bringing more victims in. It's a repetitive cycle.
Thank you so much, Amber. That's another great question, right on the target. So traffickers are those people, criminals, that operate their whole criminal activity on the holes and gaps. So wherever there is a hole and gap between the children and the family relationship, they are vulnerable, they are there. Wherever there is a gap within the legal system, they are there. And all of what you said is just right. Traffickers are engaging, establishing their criminal network wherever there is a gap. Already, right now, there is a gap there. So they are establishing their criminal activity in that area. And until the time we get to a point, be able to just cover all of those holes, we are not able to address human trafficking effectively. And I would tell you, ladies, that there is a long way to go.
The problem needs more of a response than we're able to provide at this point. And with as many people as possible, we want to put out an all call. Like, in addition to the people that are trained, some sort of training for us to identify and report, and how the community can get involved and extend the reach of the hands of these other first responders and reporters. What, even if this is a way to address, what can we do, or what is being done to undo or address the damage to victims? For example, the PTSD and the trauma, so that they can move on with their lives. Because I'm thinking, with it continuing, then there's going to be a lot of victims that lay in the wake. How do we address their experience and healing?
Thank you. It's another great question. So your question is categorized under the advocacy for survivors of human trafficking. So I apologize. The reason I'm using the terminology victims and survivors at the both time is because I'm referring to two different situations. When individuals are still in the trafficking situation, so we refer them as victims. And when they are out of that trafficking situation, so they are called survivors. So for that reason, I'm dividing that to two different situations, one advocacy for victims and one advocacy for survivors. So let's start with victims. So in human trafficking operation, we just see that victims coming out of the situation for a short period of time and then again go back to their traffickers. Again, it's just a cycle of abuse, just repeating, and repeating. Why is that? The reason is, when victims are getting out of the trafficking situation, out of the hands of traffickers, they don't have that community support. There are not services out there to provide to them. Unfortunately, I need to share with you, in some places and many cases, we have victims started to be victims of human trafficking as young as 8, as young as 10, as young as 12. They never had a chance to have a normal life, a life that teach them how to manage their finances, how to finish their education, how to continue that. So they are so behind of so many skills that other community members haven't gone through what they went. So that whenever they are coming out of that trafficking situation, they can't find a job. So then when they come out and they don't see any services that they available to them, so they realize they depend on their traffickers on necessary items, including food, clothes, shelter. So they are back to the cycle. Now let's just talk about survivors, are those people who are out of a trafficking situation. Their situation is not better. Unfortunately, still it's a long way to go. There are advocacy groups that working on providing assistance for survivors for their education so that they can finish their education or get some degree so that they can build their skills to be able to have jobs. And then there is a movement is trying to convince criminal justice systems in the states and federal to just delete and eliminate whatever criminal background survivors of human trafficking have as a result of trafficking situation, so that they are able to get a job and that criminal background is not in the resume. And then health insurance situation. Please, ladies, don't forget, when you are an 8-year-old child, start being in trafficking situation, being raped over 20 times in 24 hours, what do you expect the physics and the minds of this individual be at the age of 30 that they survive a trafficking situation? I can tell you that there is great needs of services, trauma services, psychiatric services, physical services. Many of these survivors may develop different kinds of cancers and different kinds of illnesses as a result of the pressures their body and mind went through during the trafficking situation. So there is a great need of services to be provided, but the first step is that the community be really aware of this situation. And also, main point is that don't judge people. I really have problem with that. I see many people that they say they wanted that happen to them. So that's it. But the thing is that no, when we talk about victims of human trafficking, we are talking about someone who was manipulated.
We are barely scratching the surface on this topic. Please share with us how we can get involved and connect with resources.
Locally in St. Louis area, you can find more about human trafficking on our website, gatewayhumantrafficking.org. So there are information about human trafficking, monthly events. We have a speaking series that this is free of charge for public. We tap onto various issues about human trafficking from speakers all around the nations that they are experts in various fields of human trafficking. And also there are resources available on our website, including video segments, and also in our social media, small segments about human trafficking that if people follow, they can learn more about human trafficking.
Thank you so very much for the insight that you've provided. And ladies, this is something that's going to call us to task in all areas, I'm sure. But that's going to do it for this episode of Let's Talk, and we'll keep talking. Make sure you all follow STL TV on social media in order to not miss an episode, but to stay informed. And all things St. Louis, stay connected to STL TV. We'll see you next week.